I'll never shake that first time I saw Karen. She was strolling through our local farmer's market, decked out in a flashy sun visor that screamed, "Look at me." She had an opinion on everything, like how the carrots weren't quite straight enough or the honey was too thick, throwing those comments around like she was in charge of the place. The vendors just took it, acting like they didn't hear her, but I'm not one for brushing things under the rug when something's off. At the time, I had no idea she'd end up moving in right next to my farm, or that she'd turn into this constant thorn in my side with a smile so slick it could slice through anything. Before long, Karen planted herself in the shiny new neighborhood that sprang up on the land beside mine practically overnight. You've seen those spots, perfect little houses all in a row, mailboxes that match, and a list of rules longer than your arm. Stuff like, your fence can only be this one shade of white, or get those trash cans out of sight by 6 in the evening. No excuses. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but it hit different when her homeowners association started poking their noses into my farm business. They'd tell me when they thought I should mow my fields or demand my barn fit their fancy building standards. That's when I said enough's enough. I'm no kid with a short fuse. I've been around the block plenty of times and know when to stand my ground. Still, Karen's group kept mailing me these letters, each one more out there than the last. None of it would have held up anyway. My family's been tending this land for nearly 100 years. My granddad broke this ground first, and I've got more care for it than any of those rule-obsessed folks ever could. I tried to stay level-headed, thinking maybe they'd gotten their wires crossed. But Karen? She'd made herself the big shot of that homeowners association and seemed dead set on ruffling my feathers. Here's the twist, she had this way about her. All sugary, but with a bite. "Oh, darling, you just don't know how things roll these days," she'd say, smooth as butter. Deep down, though, she acted like anything she could see was hers to boss around. That's what set us up for the wild ride I'm about to lay out for you. It was early spring, and my fields were popping with that light green color you only get that time of year. The calves were bouncing around near the fence, full of life, while the older cows stood there chewing away, like they were catching up on small-town chatter. Off in their own corner, my two bulls, Max and Duke, were chilling. I'd had them for a couple years by then. Huge, powerful animals, each over 1,000 pounds, with this quiet, thoughtful way about them. Treat them good, and they're calm as can be. Get them riled up or step out of line, though, and you're hightailing it to safety before you know it. I kept things polite with Karen, even when she'd fuss about how I spread my fertilizer or grumble about the dust my tractor kicked up. Once, she even hinted I should pave my gravel drive to make it less country. I just grinned and said, "That's how I like my farm," and that was that. Then, out of nowhere, I started seeing more cars lining the quiet road that runs along my land. I didn't pay it much mind at first, figured it was some neighborhood sale or maybe an open house thing. But one sunny Saturday morning, I woke up to a string of SUVs and minivans parked all along the road, some with plates from out of state. Engines were clicking as they cooled, and doors were popping open left and right. I climbed onto my old John Deere and cruised down the path to check it out. That's when I saw them, a bunch of people in matching pastel shirts, lugging picnic baskets, setting up shop right next to my fence. They were scoping out my pasture like it was up for grabs. I killed the engine and stepped off, my boots sinking into the damp dirt. "Hey, y'all need something?" I asked, trying to keep my tone easy instead of letting my irritation slip out. This lady with her hair all done up real nice piped up. "Ah, you're so kind to ask. Karen said we could hang out here. It's just too pretty to pass up." Karen said that. Did she? I replied, raising an eyebrow. Far as I knew, this was my land, and nobody'd run that by me. Right then, Karen comes waltzing over, big hat flopping in the breeze, flashing a grin that was almost too much. "Morning," she called out. "We're putting on a little spring gathering for the association, and your field's just so nice right now." Those community event notices they'd sent me flashed in my head. I'd assumed they meant a barbecue or something in their perfect little dead-end street. Not that they'd spill onto my property. The sheer nerve of it hit me hard. I sucked in a breath, counting to 5 in my head, telling myself not to blow up just yet. So there I was, staring at Karen, pointing at the big checkered blankets and shiny folding chairs they'd set up all over my land. Karen, I don't remember saying you could throw a whatever this is on my property, I said, waving my hand at the whole scene. She just brushed me off like it was nothing. Fine, don't stress about it, she chirped. We'll tidy up when we're done. Think of it like a little swap, your farm life mixing with our fancy suburban vibe. I looked at her, hoping she'd at least act like she felt bad about it. Nope. She was dead serious, acting like her homeowners association crew was doing me some big favor by hanging out in my fields. Meanwhile, the rest of them kept unloading stuff, coolers, those big sun umbrellas, and huge bowls of salad. A few even wandered over to the fence, snapping pics of my cows like they were at a petting zoo. I didn't want to fight, but I wasn't about to let her act like my land was hers to borrow whenever she felt like it. I turned around, hopped back on my tractor, and rolled off without another word. Let them have their picnic for now, I figured. I'd deal with it soon enough. But what went down later? That turned into the kind of story folks around here still talk about, because sometimes you just hit your limit. That Saturday, I tried to keep busy with my usual stuff, fresh bedding for the goat pen, fixing up part of the corral, checking my feed supplies. But knowing Karen's group was out there on my land bugged me like a splinter I couldn't dig out. Every now and then, I catch sight of them, lounging in my fields like it was some high-class getaway spot. By the afternoon, I noticed them tossing around what looked like lawn darts, right by the fence that keeps my bulls, Max and Duke, separate from the pasture. I started picturing one of those city folks accidentally chucking a dart over the fence and hitting Duke square in the back. I could hear their laughs drifting over, loud and carefree. They were treating my place like a playground, something to mess around on and leave behind when they got bored. There's a line between being a good neighbor and letting people walk all over you. My grandparents always said not to let kindness turn you into a pushover, and I could feel the boot prints on me that day. But the thing that really pushed me over the edge wasn't even about me, it was about the land, my family's history. One of their crew climbed over the fence to take a selfie by the old windmill my grandpa put up years ago. They were up on the rusty platform, giggling and snapping photos. I squeezed my eyes shut, imagining that rickety thing giving out under them, or worse, them getting hurt and trying to drag me into some legal mess. Farming's hard enough without dealing with that kind of nonsense from people who don't even belong here. By early evening, after I'd wrapped up my chores, I headed down there. Most of them were packing up, but a handful were still hanging around, munching on cookies and chatting under an umbrella near the field. Karen was right in the middle, going on about putting up a new fence. It had stopped the cows from wandering into our neighborhood, she said, like my cows had any interest in crashing their cookouts. I cleared my throat and put on the friendliest smile I could manage. Karen, we've got to talk. She spun around, that big smile of hers lighting up again. About what, Ton? My patience was running on fumes, but I kept it together. About how you and your buddies can't just show up and use my fields for your parties without asking me first. She let out this big, dramatic sigh, like I was some clueless guy who didn't get it. We had such a fun day, why ruin it with all this fuss? Come on, Han, you've got so much space. There's plenty for everybody. We're neighbors. It's a community thing. Not my community, I shot back before I could stop myself. My family's had this land since 1922, and if you don't respect it, you're crossing a line. That's all there is to it. Her face drowned for a second, but she bounced back fast. Well, we did you a favor, you know. A couple folks said they might swing by and grab some fresh eggs from you sometime. Fresh eggs? Like that made it all okay. I glanced at the group behind her. They were staring at me like I was some grumpy kid throwing a fit. I don't like stirring up trouble, but I had to draw a line somewhere. Karen, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm telling you now, don't step onto my property without my say-so again. This is your heads up. If it happens again, I'll have to do what it takes to keep you out. I figured Karen might argue, say sorry, or at least huff, and puff a little. Nope, she just shrugged, turned away, and started folding up a lawn chair. I hear you, she said, but her tone made it crystal clear she'd do whatever she wanted anyway. And that was that. By the time the sun dipped low, they were gone, leaving my field a mess, trampled grass and random bits of junk scattered around. Sunday morning rolled around, and there I was, picking up their empty soda cans, plastic forks, and soggy sandwich crusts. Real classy bunch, huh? I tried to shake it off, wive, and let live, you know? But you don't just stroll onto someone's land, get told to stop, and then keep coming back like it's no big deal. Sure enough, the next weekend, those bright blue minivans and SUVs showed up again. This time, they'd gone all out and set up a portable volleyball net right in my field, smack near where Max and Duke, my bulls, hang out. I walked over, taking it all in, keeping my cool for the moment. Some of them were whooping it up, smacking volleyballs back and forth, while others laid out blankets and coolers like it was old news. There was this young couple dangling a balloon over the fence, messing with my cows like it was some kind of game at a fair. And who was right in the middle of it all? Karen, decked out in a loud pink shirt that practically lit up the place, locking eyes with me, that smug look of hers shining bright. Before I could even get a word out, she jumped in. You said I had to ask permission, so here I am asking, can we please use this spot for our weekly get-together? The nerve of it left me speechless for a second. I started to say no, but then it hit me. If I did, she'd just brush it off, haggle with me, or spin it so I look like the cranky old guy next door. That's when a light bulb went off in my head, sneaky as a fox sneaking through the brush. My grandpa used to say, if you want folks to get the point, sometimes you've got to show them the line they're crossing. And I knew just how to do it. Let Max and Deuce show these folks why my farm isn't their personal picnic spot. I'd never pulled a stunt like this with my bulls before, but sometimes you've got to get creative when you're backed into a corner. Now, hold up. I wasn't about to let two giant bulls loose without a plan. Max and Duke are big boys, sure, but they've got their routines, they know their space, and they listen to me. All I needed was a little show to remind these uninvited guests they weren't in some neighborhood park. This was a working farm, real animals, real stakes, and real consequences if you didn't belong there. The day I decided to make my move was sticky and humid, with dark clouds piling up in the sky. I stood back, arms crossed, watching the Homeowners Association crowd yucking it up under some pop-up tents they'd plopped down on my land. Kids were darting around, swinging foam noodles, while the grown-ups sipped lemonade out of plastic cups. I fired up the tractor and rolled over. The second Karen saw me, she raised an eyebrow and gave me the teasing look. Back again, she said, swirling her drink like she was at a fancy party. It took everything I had not to lose it right there, her thinking I was the one out of place on my own property. But I kept it together, flashed a tight smile, and said, Karen, I just want to show you something about that fence over there. See where it's dipping a little? I pointed toward the far side of the bullpen where Max and Duke were lounging against the rails. She shrugged. You ought to fix that up sometime, she tossed out, all casual. I grinned back. Oh, I'm about to take care of it right now. With that, I hopped off the tractor, strolled over to the fence, and, real subtle-like, unhooked the gate that opens from the bullpen into the pasture. The cows on the other side of the field wouldn't care, but Max and Duke, they'd notice. It took a second, but then Max lifted his huge head, sniffing the air. Duke perked up too, stepping through the gap with that slow, curious walk of his. Over by the tents, I could hear the chatter start to die down. Someone piped up, Hey, is that okay? That was my moment. I raised my voice just enough for them to catch it. Y'all might want to start packing up. Those bulls are real fond of crowds in their territory. You should have seen Karen's face. It went pale as a sheet. You're not for real, she said, her voice wobbling a bit. Down. I'm as real as it gets, I answered, cool as could be. They won't mess with me, naturally. I figured a bunch of strangers traipsing around in loud outfits, waving volleyballs, might look like trouble to Max and Duke. Let me set the record straight. These bulls weren't wild monsters charging at anything that moved. They were more like oversized, grumpy pups, chill most of the time, but they'd let you know who's boss if you acted dumb around them. All those unfamiliar voices squealing at the side of them? Yeah, that got their attention. The bulls took a few steps forward, heads tilted, like they were sizing up the situation. A buzz of nervous whispers rippled through the crowd. Chairs got tipped over, sandwiches dropped in the dirt. Karen shot me a look, like she was silently asking, "What's your deal?" But I wasn't in the mood to preach again. Sometimes you've got to let things play out. That's when it hit me, funny as it was. After all her talk about how they belonged here, she was finally seeing what a farm really is. You can't just waltz in like it's your backyard. Max let out a deep grunt, swishing his tail. A couple of guys in golf shirts started stepping back, hands out like they could stop a 1,200-pound bull with a stiff arm. Then Duke stomped the ground, kicking up a puff of dust, and some lady let out a yelp. Karen tried to play it cool. "Okay, everybody, let's, head back to the cul-de-sac," she said, waving them off like it was all under control. I had to fight back a smirk. Felt like I'd just played the winning move in a game she didn't even know we were in. They started pulling back, some scrambling to their cars in a hurry, others yanking down their tents in a panic. For a split second, I wondered if I'd gone too far. I wasn't putting them in real danger. I'd step in if the bulls got too worked up. But this felt fair. They'd ignored every line I'd drawn, and now they were facing the natural result. Timing's a funny thing. Flip one little switch, like opening a gate, and the whole picture changes. I'll admit, watching them scatter gave me a bit of a thrill. Made me think, don't the small choices we make work the same way? Like when you've been holding off for the right moment, and one tiny nudge shifts everything your way. Kind of like how hitting subscribe on a channel might bring you some unexpected luck. Call it a wink from the universe. Anyway, back to what happened. I let out a sharp whistle, signaling Max and Duties up. Believe it or not, they're trained to listen better than Karen would ever guess. They slowed down, snorting, muscles twitching with pent-up energy, but they kept their eyes on the retreating crowd. "All right, that's enough," I said under my breath, walking toward them steady and calm. They settled as they recognized me. After all, I'm the guy who feeds them, looks after them. They've got no beef with me, and hopefully none with those folks, as long as they'd stay out of their space from now on. By the time the Homeowners Association crew piled into their cars, the sky cracked open, and rain started pouring down. It was like the perfect ending note to the whole mess. Soggy pastel shirts and a mad dash to leave turned it into something straight out of a funny movie gone wrong. Karen hung back for a minute, soaked to the bone, staring daggers at me from the other side of the fence. She didn't say a word, but her glare could have lit a fire. I held her gaze, unflinching. "This is my land," I said. "Don't come back without asking." I hope she heard me loud and clear. In the days after the bull showdown, I half expected some lawyer from her group to show up at my door. Didn't happen, not right away, at least, but the gossip spread around town like wildfire. Guys at the feed store pulled me aside, grinning ear to ear, begging for the full scoop. They'd heard Karen's fancy friends ran for their lives when my crazy bulls came charging. By the time the story hit the diner, it had Karen sprinting in high heels with Max and Duke hot on her tail. It was blown way out of proportion, but the core of it stuck. They'd crossed onto my land one too many times, and I'd let the bulls set them straight. For a little while, it seemed like Karen might have backed off. Days went by with no minivans creeping near my fields, no letters in the mail, no more drama. Maybe they've finally figured out a farm isn't a free-for-all park, or maybe they were cooking up something sneakier. I was hoping for the first, but I stayed ready just in case. Then, about a week later, I found a crisp white envelope in my mailbox. No sender listed, but I knew that stiff, official lettering straight from the Homeowners Association. I almost tossed it in the trash unopened, but curiosity got the better of me, so I ripped it open. It was short and sharp, with about as much warmth as a rattlesnake. They claimed I was keeping dangerous animals, warning that they were worried my bulls might get loose and cause chaos in their perfect little neighborhood. They told me to lock down my livestock for their safety or they'd take me to court. I laughed out loud at that. My bulls were behind fences on my land, doing what they've always done. They'd never once wandered into their streets. The only reason Max and Duke got close to anyone that day was because those folks were camped out where they didn't belong. Still, they were trying to twist the law to scare me. They didn't know me well enough to see I don't scare easy. I've dealt with worse than a few empty threats. So my next step was simple. I called my lawyer, Dan. He's a calm guy with a slow drawl, the kind who's seen his share of land fights and doesn't flinch at a letter like that. You've got property rights, he told me over the phone. Long as your fences are up to county code, they've got nothing. I'll write them back. Hearing that settled me down. I hadn't done a thing wrong, and I had a hunch Karen knew it too. Didn't stop her from stirring the pot, no. With Dan's help, I started putting it all on paper, the trespassing, the uninvited picnics, all my warnings, the whole deal. If Karen wanted to push this further, I'd be ready to push back. Meanwhile, the farm wasn't gonna run itself. Spring work was piling up, fences to check, animals to tend, chores to knock out. The Karen mess was just a side story to the real grind of my days. That is, until one late afternoon when I spotted a shiny black SUV with dark windows creeping down the dirt road toward my place. One day, this sleek black SUV rolled up and stopped near my mailbox. Two guys in sharp suits climbed out, not the kind of folks you'd expect to see kicking around a farm. They gave me a polite nod and handed over business cards from some law firm in town. We're here on behalf of Ms. Karen Mitchell with the Willow Crest Homeowners Association, one of them said. We'd like to talk about smoothing over this little dust-up you've been having. I squinted at them, not exactly thrilled, but waved them up to the porch anyway. I set out some water, gotta play nice, even if I was tempted to point them back to their car. The taller one coughed a little and launched into this pitch about how the Homeowners Association was all about keeping their neighborhood safe and cozy. He said some of their people were nervous about my bulls being so close to their side of the line. Their fix? I should herd Max and Duke off to another corner of my land or slap up more fences to make sure there's no chance they'd bump into the association's gatherings. I almost laughed right there. Wait a sec, I said. Your client's the one who dragged a crowd onto my property without so much as a heads up. And now you want me to rearrange my whole farm because they can't keep their distance? He raised his hands like he didn't mean any harm. We're just looking for a way to keep things calm and dodge any courtroom hassle. I've seen enough to know a polite threat when it's staring me in the face. The real message? Give Karen what she's after, or she'll seek the law on me. I set my glass down with a solid clunk. Tell her my bulls are staying put. If she's worried about trouble, here's an idea. Keep her and her pals off my land. That'll do the trick. They traded a quick look, probably thrown that I wasn't playing ball. They tried to sweet-talk me, saying nobody wanted a long fight and we could figure it out, but I didn't budge an inch. Eventually, they took off, sliding a card into my hand and telling me to ring them if I had a change of heart. I gave them a stiff grin as they peeled out, the sticky air still hanging heavy. Karen wasn't dropping this quiet-like. The bull moves had put me ahead for a bit, but now she was coming back with lawyers and big asks. A little part of me wondered if I was taking it too far. Maybe I should just give a little. But everything I've got tied up in this land, all the years behind it, said folding would set me up for more headaches later. I rode my forehead, feeling the weight of it all. Farming's tough enough without a legal tangle, but some lines you don't cross. I peeked out at Max and Duke chewing away in the dusk. Maybe I'd wish I'd given in someday, but I doubted it. Next morning, the sky was stacked with dark, brooding clouds, like it was gearing up for the next round. I was up with the sun, same as ever, tending to the animals and lining up the day's work. That lawyer visit stuck in my craw, nagging me, but it also stoked something stubborn in me. This farm's not just some patch of ground. It's my family's roots, a living piece of who we are. Every post, every stalk, every worn-out board in the barn's got a story. I wasn't about to let Karen or her homeowners association cronies or their fancy suits call the shots on how I run it. Around mid-morning, my lawyer Dan buzzed me. Word was Karen's team was cooking up a formal beef with the county, saying my animals were a public bother. County might stop by to poke around, he warned. Get ready. Fine by me. My place was squared away. Fences up to snuff. Feed stashed right. Everything clean and legal. I told Dan I'd handle it. A couple days later, the county inspector pulled up. Miss Harris, decked out in a county polo, flashing a tight smile. She seemed ready for me to snap, but I kept it mellow, walking her around the spread. We hit the bullpen where that gate stunt went down. She had the fence, flagged a few spots I could tighten up, but didn't spot anything off. You know the homeowners association next door has been griping, she said, scribbling on her clipboard. I nodded. Sure do. They keep wandering over here, then cry about my bulls like it's their fault for being there. She smirked a little. Muck, those associations have pull around here, but I'm just checking the rules. So far, you're good. Need to see anything else? I asked, hands tucked in my pockets. She shrugged. I'll file my notes and let you know if something comes up. Then she leaned in a bit. Just between us, I've seen this play out before. A shiny new neighborhood butts up against old farmland, and they try to shove out whatever doesn't fit their picture. I tipped my head. That's the deal. Appreciate you keeping it straight. When she drove off, I felt a spark of relief. She'd cut through the bull, but I knew Karen wouldn't let it lie. She's too hooked on winning. That Sunday, I rolled into town for supplies. My rickety truck bumped along as thunder muttered off in the distance. The feed store guy razzied me, "Hey, bull wrangler," cracking up about the whole thing. I saked a laugh. Heading home, I caught sight of dark smoke twisting up near my land. My gut sank, fire's a farmer's nightmare. I floored it, rattling over the road, brain spinning with bad possibilities. When I got to my turn, I saw flames chewing through some dry scrub right where my fields touched the association's turf. It wasn't a monster blaze, just a brush fire, but close enough to the fence that a puff of wind could send it my way. I helped out, snatched the extinguisher from my truck, and bolted over. A handful of association folks were milling around, looking antsy. One had a hose, squirting water that didn't even reach the fire. Karen was there, face pinched. Fire department's on the way, someone hollered. I didn't wait, dove in, blasting foam at the hot spots, kicking out embers. A few of them shook off the daze and pitched in with buckets. By the time the fire truck showed, we'd wrestled it down. My heart was hammering, sweat soaking me. The firefighters mopped up the rest, and I slumped by the fence, sucking air. The fence was singed but held. Max and Duke had hightailed it deeper into the field, snuffling like they'd seen trouble. Karen edged over, hesitant, eyes bouncing from the charred grass to me. Thanks, she said, voice wobbly. I shrugged, still huffing. Didn't want the whole place torched, yours too. She stared at me a moment, then looked away. I caught a flicker of something, maybe regret. Could be she saw that, even with all this mess, we're still in the same boat when stuff like fire hits. The fire crew figured it sparked from a tossed cigarette or grill ember, probably from their side. Nobody fessed up, but the quiet said they knew it was theirs. After the trucks cleared out, Karen stuck around. Your bowl's all right? She asked, real low. Yeah, shook up but okay, I said, then leveled a look at her. Karen, I'm not out to get you, we're your crew. I just don't want my farm jacked up or folks acting like it's free game. She didn't snap back with her usual attitude. Just like the burn patch, then me. Guess we pushed too much, she murmured. And I didn't really get where you're coming from. Thunder growled as the wind kicked up, sweeping the smoke off. For the first time since this all started, it felt like we'd stumbled onto some wobbly common turf. I wasn't banking on it lasting, but it was a start, a small, careful one. Maybe she finally clocked that my farm's not her playground. Maybe she got that the land itself can smack you with reality. We're tied up in this together, like it or not. My wish? Keep the bulls on my side. Their party's on theirs. And no more stepping over without a word first. I watched the clouds pile up, mulling how far you can stretch things before they snap back. Karen let her gang picnic here, so I set the bowls loose, a lesson that stuck. But it was that fire that made us both pause and see the wider view. Sometimes storms and blazes tear you apart, sometimes they shove you toward a rough truce. Maybe that's the heart of it, not just the bowls or the lines, but sorting out where we land in this mix of dirt, roots, and the odd ways we link up when the stakes are high. Well, folks, this is a story about me, Karen, and a couple of bulls who taught us all a lesson about boundaries. Sometimes you need a little chaos to find peace. What do you think? Have you ever experienced this from a neighbor? Leave a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed this wild ride, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe.